You may run if you mean to, the Duke of Brierholt said, without turning from the dark window. They all do, in the end. I have learned not to take it personally. There is the door. He spoke the words like a man laying down a hand of cards he already knows will lose. He had heard the carriage on the drive, and the brief murmur of the housekeeper, and the footstep at the threshold of his study, and he had braced himself, as he always braced himself, for the small cruelty he had come to expect, the new companion who would last a week, or a day, or who would take one look at the shadowed rooms and the silent master of them remember, all at once, the things that had been whispered in the village and the drawing rooms and the great houses for 3 long years. Mad, they said, the mad Duke of Brierholt, unstable, dangerous, not in his right mind since the fever took his sister, best avoided, best pitied, best, above all, left alone. So he did not turn to look at the woman in the doorway. He kept his eyes upon his own dark reflection in the glass, and he waited for the rustle of skirts retreating down the corridor. It did not come. "It is a very fine door," Damaris Croft said, in a calm and unhurried voice. "But I have only just arrived, and I confess I am tired from the road, and I should much rather sit by your fire than walk back out into the cold. If it is all the same to you, your grace, I believe I shall stay." The Duke of Brierholt turned around. She was younger than her steady voice had led him to expect, with a quiet, plain-featured face and clear eyes that held neither fear nor the bright false courage of those who fear and hide it. She had set down her small case beside the door. She was looking at him directly, not at the shadows, not at the threadbare grandeur of the room, not over her shoulder toward the exit at him, as one looks at a person, and not at a rumor wearing a person's clothes. "You have heard what they say of me," he said. It was not a question. "I have heard a great deal said of you," Damaris answered. "On the road from the village, in the inn, from the very coachman who brought me here, who would not drive past the gates but set me down at the lodge and turned his horses about as though the devil were behind him." She moved, unbidden, to the cold hearth and crouched and began without ceremony to build up the dying fire. "I find that what is said of a person and what is true of a person are very often 2 different things, and that the distance between them is generally filled up with the speaker's own fear. I prefer to learn a thing for myself." He watched her coax the flame with a kind of stunned attention. "And what have you learned for yourself in the 3 minutes you have been here?" She sat back on her heels and considered him. "That you expected me to run," she said. "That you told me where the door was before you told me your name. That a man does not learn to say such a thing so smoothly unless he has had a great deal of practice in being left." The fire caught and gilded her plain face. "I have learned that you are not mad, your grace. I have learned that you are alone. They are not the same thing, though I begin to see how the world has confused them." The Duke of Brierholt stood very still. In 3 years no one had said such a thing to him. In 3 years no one had stayed in a room with him long enough to say anything at all that was not edged with weariness or thick with pity. He had grown a shell about himself, layer upon patient layer, the way an oyster grows one, not out of madness, but out of the simple, unbearable wear of being feared by every soul he met. And this small, calm woman had reached past all of it in the space of a single fire being lit, and named the thing exactly. "Sit, then," he said last roughly, because his voice was not quite steady. "Since you will not run, there is no one to bring tea. The kitchen maid gave notice on Thursday. She said the house was haunted." He sat heavily in the chair across from her. "It is not haunted, it is only quiet. But I have given up explaining the difference." "Then I shall make the tea myself," Damaris said, "and you shall tell me where the kitchen is, and we shall manage very well without the maid who was frightened of the quiet." And that, more or less, was how it began. She had been engaged as a companion, though to whom exactly, no one had been able to say, for there was no lady of the house, no invalid aunt, No one but the Duke himself rattling about the great shadowed rooms of Brierholt with 3 loyal old servants who stayed because they had served his father and could not bring themselves to leave. The arrangement had been made, in truth, by his old steward, a kindly man who could not bear to watch his master sink and who had reasoned, privately and desperately, that what the Duke needed was not a physician, but a single human being who would simply be there day after day and not flinch. The steward had not had high hopes. He had engaged a dozen such people over 3 years. None had lasted. Damaris Croft lasted. She lasted the first week, in which she learned the house, and discovered that the rumors of madness rested upon nothing more than a grieving man who could not sleep, and who therefore walked the corridors at night with a candle, and who had once, in the early days of his grief, been heard by a passing groom to speak aloud to the empty chair where his sister had used to sit. From this, a man weeping and speaking to a chair in the dark, the whole monstrous legend had grown. Demurning it, felt a slow anger kindle in her that was unlike her usual calm, and she spoke of it to no one, and resolved within herself to undo it if undoing were in her power. She lasted the first month, in which the Duke of Brierholt, by slow and disbelieving degrees, began to thaw. He had forgotten what it was to be spoken to plainly. She gave him no flattery, which he had despised, and no fear, which had broken his heart by inches, and no pity, which had been worst of all. She simply spoke to him about the books in his neglected library, which she read and discussed with him, about the overgrown garden, which she began, with his grudging permission, to set in order, about the weather and the village and the small daily business of a house coming slowly back to life. And the Duke, who had thought the warm part of himself dead and buried with his sister, discovered that it had only been sleeping, and that it woke at the sound of a calm voice that was not afraid of him. "You are not what I was led to expect," he told her one evening late in that first month. They sat in the library, the heavy drapes drawn back for once to let the last gold of the sunset in, a single branch of candles lit against the coming dark, a book open and forgotten between them. "And what were you led to expect?" Another who would not last the week, another who would write to her people of the dreadful Mad Duke and the haunted house and how she had escaped with her wits intact. He turned the heavy signet ring upon his finger, a habit of his when his feelings ran ahead of his words. "Instead, I find a woman who builds my fires and reads my books and argues with me about whether the roses ought to be cut back, and who looks at me, when she looks at me, as though I were a man and not a cautionary tale." "You are a man," Damaris said simply. "I have never seen you as anything else. I cannot account for those who do." She closed the book. "May I say a thing, Your Grace, that I have wished to say for some while, and have not, for fear of presuming?" "You have never once feared to presume. Say it." She smiled a little at that. "Only this. The rumor that you are mad is the cruelest lie I have ever encountered, and it has cost you 3 years of your life, and I should like, before I am done here, to see it undone, not for the world's sake. The world does not deserve to know you, for your sake. So that a man who has done nothing in his life, but grieved too deeply for a sister he loved, is not made, by frightened people, into a monster he never was." The Duke of Brierholt looked at her across the candlelight for a long moment. Something was happening behind his dark eyes, some shifting of long-set stone. "And how," he said quietly, "would you propose to undo 3 years of whispering?" "Slowly," she said, "and by daylight. You will open this house. You will hold a dinner, a small one, the vicar and his wife, the 2 or 3 families who are decent enough to come if they are asked plainly. You will let them see you, not the legend. You. A grave, kind, weary man who keeps a good table and a fine library and grieves like any man who has loved. The legend cannot survive an evening of your actual company. It was only ever built of empty rooms and the dark." She paused. "And I will be there. I will not leave your side. And when they go home, they will not be able to repeat the lie with quite so easy a conscience, having shaken your hand." It was a mad scheme, he thought, And then he thought how strange it was that the only truly sane voice he had heard in 3 years should be proposing it. They will not come, he said. Some will not, she agreed. Some will. We need only some. Some came. The vicar came, a sturdy, honest man who had never believed the worst and was glad of an excuse to say so. His wife came, curious and kind. An old neighbor came, a widow who had known the Duke's father and had always thought the rumors a wicked shame. They came braced, every one of them, half expecting the dark house and the disordered master of the tales. And they found, instead, a house with its drapes drawn back and its candles lit and its fires warm, and a host who was grave and quiet and unfailingly courteous, who spoke of his sister once, gently, without madness and without shame, and who was clearly, anyone could see it, held steady through the long unfamiliar evening by the calm plain woman who never left his side. It is a strange thing how a lie dies. It does not die all at once. But the vicar went home and told the truth of what he had seen, and his wife told it, and the widow told it, and within a season the village that had crossed itself at the name of Brierholt was saying instead, with the particular relish of people correcting an error that was never their fault, that the rumors had been nonsense all along, that the Duke was only a sad gentleman who had grieved hard and kept to himself, and that there was a good steady companion up at the great house who had brought him round, and was it not a shame how cruel people could be? The Duke of Brierholt heard the change come, as a man hears a long frost begin to break. And he understood, with a clarity that frightened him a little, that he owed it entirely to Damaris Croft, who had walked into his shadowed study expecting to be told where the door was, and had chosen the fire instead. He found her in the garden, the evening he understood it fully. She was cutting back the roses they had argued about, in the slow gold light, and he came down the gravel path to her and stood a moment watching, and she looked up and waited, secateurs in hand, in her plain grey gown, with a smudge of earth upon her cheek, and he thought he had never in his life seen anything he wished so much to keep. "You have given me back my name," he said. "I have given you nothing that was not already yours. I only stood beside it until the others remembered." "It is the same thing," he said. "Damaris." It was the first time he had spoken her given name, and they both heard it. "When you were engaged, it was for a season. The season is nearly out. The steward tells me you have had 2 letters, offering you other posts in houses that are warmer and gladder, and not lately haunted by a legend now laid to rest. He thinks I do not know of them. I know of them." He drew a breath that was not quite steady. "I am about to do a presumptuous thing, which is fitting, for I learned presumption from you. I am going to ask you not to take either post. I am going to ask you to stay at Brierholt, not as a companion, paid by the season, but as its mistress and mine, for I find I cannot any longer imagine these rooms without your voice in them, nor wish to." Damaris Croft set down the secateurs. She was a calm woman, and she remained calm now, but her clear eyes had filled, and when she spoke her steady voice had a tremor in it at last. "When I came," she said, "they told me a duke had gone mad with grief in a haunted house, and I did not believe them, and I came to see for myself. And I found a man who had been left so many times he had learned to point at the door before anyone could leave. I have wished, every day since, to be the one who did not leave." She put her earth-smudged hand into his. "I will stay, Severin. I will gladly stay, not because you are a duke. Because you are the kindest, most wrongly used, most quietly worthy man I have ever known, and I should have to be madder than they ever called you to walk out of that door now." He laughed, the rare, startled, rusty laugh of a man relearning the sound of his own joy, and he drew her in and held her there in the gold light among the roses they had argued over and tended together, and neither of them spoke for a while, for there was no need. They were married quietly, in the small church the vicar kept, and the village came every one, the same village that had crossed itself at his name a year before. And the house that had stood shadowed and shut and called haunted was opened wide, with every drape drawn back and every fire lit, and there was laughter in it, and the sound of 2 people who had each been told, in their different ways, that they were not worth staying for, and who had found in one another the staying they had both stopped hoping for. In the years that followed, the Duke of Brierholt was known throughout the county not as the Mad Duke, but only as a grave and gentle man with a kindness in him that ran deep, and a wife who was plainly the steady heart of him. And on the long winter evenings, when the wind moved in the chimneys, he would sit by the fire with Damaris's hand in his, and remember the night she had stood in his doorway and declined, so calmly, to be afraid, and he would think that the world had been wrong about a great many things, but never so wrong as when it had called him alone, for he never would be again.